Okay, we'll get into it then. All right. My talk is modelling early days streetscapes, and at the end of it, I've put in some a bit of a talk on the water and making water, which I've just some of the things that I've had an attempt at with Newcastle and even with Sydney Central. A lot of my models that I've made, I always make them just a little bit too squeaky clean. They're more like architectural models, and I've had a lot of people say the streets are just squeaky clean. There's nothing as far as rubbish goes on the streets. So I've decided, finally with Newcastle, to start putting horse manure down the street, because I don't know how many people pointed that out. So I've started researching, and I thought, well, when you look at this picture here, this is Scott Street in Newcastle. Going by the photo and the buildings, it's probably about 1905, somewhere around then. The tram tracks in Scott Street went into Newcastle in 1893. And in that picture, when you look at it, there's lots of people standing around, the hansom cabs. I'll just also point out the hansom cabs, they're always, in every single photo, always facing the opposite way to the traffic. And when I was talking with Steve Curry, we decided that it was obviously, the reason for that would be so the passengers, when they get out of the hansom cabs, they can actually see the oncoming traffic. If they had the trams and other horse-drawn vehicles coming up from behind, there'd be a lot of injuries and deaths, I'd say. So with the street, when you look at it, there's no rubbish. The only thing you can see is just an endless scattering of horse manure. So I've done some research, and on the internet I found a fantastic article on the Great Horse Manure Crisis of 1894, and and I thought, well, look, I'm going to have to do this because people have been saying streets too clean, and this thing, it's a must read. There's about 5 pages, and it covers the cities generally of Sydney and of London and New York, and just describes what it was like. It was actually a worldwide crisis. It was appalling. But with this picture here, we've got a picture of Pyrmont Bridge in Darling Harbour, and I've got a better photo of it next, but it's got just a load of chaos, horse-drawn traffic. The bridge would have obviously been turned to let a ship go through into the harbour, and afterwards, huge amount of horse shit. So in this picture, and the other thing with that, it also, like, it describes the councils. They employed young fellas, and they were called block boys, or nicknamed sparrow starvers, and they were employed. They had a little trolley and a little broom, and they'd go and sweep up any horse manure that's been left behind. Also described in this picture here, it says that in London by 1900 there was 11,000 horse-drawn cabs, hansom cabs. So if you think about that, that's a lot of horses, a lot of horse manure. And then it also says there was nearly 2,000, I think, is it, horse-drawn buses. And they had up to 12 teams, or 12 horses, and they'd be in teams, and they'd be spelled during the day, and another 4 horses or whatever we're doing to continue on, and as well as various carts, drays, wagons, and buggies, and they were all there to transport passengers and goods. So with this picture here, you can actually see the young fella down here. He's got a little trolley and his broom, and he's got a lot of work ahead of him. So you zoom in, there he is. And also ladies, because in those days had dresses right down to the ground, they actually paid the block boys so they could clear a pathway across the street so that they don't have to drag their dresses through it. The next picture here, a bit more research. This fella here, he looks like probably, it's in Sydney, probably the 1920s. And the other guy, it probably about 1900 or even earlier. But the trolleys are almost identical. So I tried researching for the actual trolley to see if I could find whether there was an actual standard advertised or something like that, or through the council, but I couldn't find anything with that. So that was my little block boy standing on the edge of the road there in Newcastle, ready to go across and start cleaning, earning his keep. So with the article, these are some of the main points that were mentioned in the article. And so a single horse can produce between 7 and 14 kilos a day. So that's a lot if you just even add up in London 11,000 hansom cabs. Horses had to be stabled, and that once again is taking up valuable land in the city. It's not like at the end of the day they sort of went back to the farm so they could frolic around in the paddock. They all had to take up more space with just masses of stables within the city. Horses had to be fed. In the summertime, manure would dry and turn into dust blown by the wind, which would get on absolutely everything. Then when it's wet, it turned into a mere like a slime, which made everything very slippery. It attracted a huge amount of flies. Horse accidents were common. They didn't have any road rules back in that day. So in a city where you've got a horse belting along, coming in from the right, it's very hard to pull two horses up. So there was a huge amount. Fatality rates, according to population, were higher for horse-drawn vehicles than today's motor vehicle society. Huge amount of accidents. Dead horses. It was such a common sight. In New York, according to the stats, there was on average 41 horses dead in the city every day. Out of all the thousands, an incredible amount. And just from accidents, bad treatment of the horses, slipping over on cobblestone roadways and things like that. Very tortured life. So also, it's not like, if you've got a dead horse, just go and get the tow truck and take it away. They're a large object, and so it would be a very common sight to just go around a corner in a city and see a dead horse. It's something that you never imagine, never shows in movies. You never see that in movies. But so quite often they were just left there to putrefy, and then someone will come along later and cut them up. So as cities grew in population and size, more horses were needed. Greater number of horses required more feed brought into the cities by horses. And originally, farmers paid stables to purchase manure for fertiliser. By 1900, it was so plentiful that the farmers were paid to help remove it. And then during the peak of this crisis, a writer for the Times of London wrote that in 50 years, every street in London would be buried under 9 feet of manure. So, like, it was the end of the world. And it even states, like, mankind was not going to die from an asteroid hitting the planet, or famine or drought. It was going to be from horse manure. And luckily, only a few years later, the motor vehicle was invented, came onto the streets, and all this pollution was cleared up. So with this picture, this is a Ralph Snowball photograph. He was a photographer who was obsessed with Newcastle. I didn't even know he existed when I first started modelling my model of Newcastle, and he took literally thousands of glass plate negatives. So this is one of his absolutely fantastic photographs. It would have been taken from either the David Cohen building or Earp Brothers building, looking down the back area of Customs House of my model. But once again, when you zoom into these photographs, we have horse poo. So here, and over here. This one here, I call the dead drop, and that's straight down, job done. But this one here, it's a bit of a classic. Horses can actually go while they're on the move, so it would be quite a common thing to see horse poo sitting around on the roadway like that. So if you ever have horses on your layout, don't be afraid to sort of scatter it like that. Now this is how I've made it. Luckily, HUMBROL's Paints has come to the rescue, and I call this shit in a can. But when you go to the hobby shop, ask for HUMBROL number 155 olive drab, because they won't know it by the other term. It makes for a really fresh horse manure colour. And as you can see in Exhibit B here, after time it tends to dry off and brown off a bit. So I'll give it a splash of HUMBROL's number 173 track colour, and that gives you the sort of the more aged horse shit. With now for the fibrous effect to it, I've used Woodland Scenics fine turf yellow grass, and the way I've gone about making it is I've just got a toothpick with woodwork PVA glue, and just sort of put little blobs all around the road and some smears and things like that. Then I would pat the grass into it. Once it had dried, I would just vacuum up all the loose stuff and then apply the paint, and there you have a perfect horse shit.
Thank you for doing the research for us.
Yeah, look, but I highly recommend anyone to get on the internet, type in the great horse manure crisis of 1894 and have a good read.
How many different colours of paint did you go through until you settled on 155 olive drab?
I happen to have the tin there amongst my collection. I thought, that's pretty close. But yeah, once again, it's a fresh one. All right, we're going from horse manure to horse-drawn vehicles. So this is just a shot looking down Hunter Street, and it's a colour postcard, but it just shows like the more leisurely life of Newcastle City with handsome cabs along the side. The colours are good for postcards. They give you a bit of an idea of the tones and stuff like that they would have had. The only thing with coloured postcards, you can't really be 100% sure whether it was painted on that particular era or whether it was many decades later and someone's just painted colours that they liked. Now this is a collage of just some of the horse-drawn vehicles that I've produced through the time for my layout. Some of them I haven't done the stagecoach yet, but what I've been lucky enough, if anyone knows Greg Edwards from Data Sheets, Greg, who's produced all the detailed plans for railway carriages and locos and infrastructure, he also has an obsession with horse-drawn vehicles. So he has been kind enough to actually email me every now and then. He'll email me some plans, and I will then draw them in Corel. I'll trace them and draw them to scale, and then draw them flat and get them ready to be photo etched. So there's some of the vehicles that are on Newcastle at the moment. I draw up little people as well to scale so that I can actually slot them into the carriages and make sure they look fine with it. There's also other not as common horse-drawn vehicles that you see, and one of them's the hearse, which was still a fairly popular vehicle because death was still fairly popular back then. You can also have not fire engines, but horse-drawn vehicle, fire vehicles. Now this is my hearse. You would have seen it on the layout. This one was another one of Greg Edwards' drawings that he sent me, and I was really pleased. Out of all the work, it all folded up and slotted together and soldered together really well. With the men, they were actually just workmen, and they had shovels in their hands, and I just cut the shovels off and repainted them so they had suits. And I got a file, and I filed their heads down flat, and then with the chopping board I just got some 2mm styrene rod and just cut off a couple of little wafers of that and, to make the brim of the hat, and then I used 0.12mm styrene just to make the top part of the top hat. Once they're painted, they come up fairly well. But of course these days we can just go and visit Lindsay, wear a top hat, and he'll scan and print us now. And one thing also with the horses, I got Bob Rawlins to cast the horses for me, and they were an English horse which were harnessed, but unfortunately they were castings of castings, and they were getting skinnier and skinnier, and they had potholes in them and things like that, so they had a bit of work to do to clean them up. But I also, with every single horse on the layout, I've actually drilled a hole through their mouth and then put a 0.2mm wire through and ran it back to the driver, and so that they actually had some reins to control the horses. But with the hearse, that's actually, I managed to find a bloke in New Zealand was 3D printing horses, and they were all harnessed, and they are absolutely superb horses. So, and also they were a lot easier to drill the hole through for their mouths. With the pewter ones, occasionally, like I'd be really put my back into it with a 0.3mm drill bit, and suddenly the whole mouth would blow off, and that was the end of the horse. Had to be put down. And Greg Edwards, the first time Greg Edwards actually saw my layout, he put his head over the layout, and within a couple of seconds just looked back at me and said, "You've harnessed the horses wrong." And I'm just going, "You're kidding?" And so he then kindly sent me some pictures to show the actual harnessing with the reins, with paired and team horses. So I didn't realise, but the reins are supposed to cross over, so this rein will pull on this horse's head to turn this way, and then this one will pull on that horse to turn that way, whereas I had it the wrong way, so when they pull on the reins, the horses would go like that. So I didn't think it through. But anyway, yeah, thanks Greg. That's just, yeah, once again, some of the vehicles. That was another one of Greg's drawings, was the milk cart, and that came up quite well as well. The other thing is, there's nothing actually better than getting out on site, whether it's structures or whatever, to actually go and measure the real thing. You get an understanding of how they're put together and how they actually worked. So this was a wagon that was up a hill just heading out of Cooma, south of Cooma, and it had a roof over the top and a signboard saying, advertising a motel and a restaurant. And the roof on the top actually helped preserve it. So even though it's looking a bit rickety, everything's still there. So it was really good to stop and photograph and measure, and then recreate it. So and when you go in underneath, you can see how it all works. And it had brakes on the wheels, and it shows the steel turntable. They're usually a couple of rings, one fixed to the axle and one to the wagon itself, and they would just grease them up, and that would do your turning, and there'd just be a rod going through linking it all. And other wagons I've seen where they have one ring and then they'd have these sort of flat steel shoes with certain different designs. So that was the end product with one of those wagons. And of course, it'll never work when they get to a corner because the horses will do that. Here's another coloured postcard. This would have been taken from Customs House Clock Tower, and looking down with the coloured postcards. They do help, to define the roadways and things like that. So, it's another good shot. All right, with this picture, this is before. Well, this is a perfect utopia. There's no horse shit in this one, but this is prior to me actually grubbying up the street. But when you look at the picture, you just say, oh, there's a dirt road with some tram tracks in it. But there's actually a fair bit of work went into putting the tram tracks into a dirt road, and this is how I did it. I used everything was 3mm MDF. The main base is plywood, but I've just glued 3mm MDF down. The footpath is just a piece of 3mm MDF which I've cut, and they're long lengths, which even has like the curve in it for the road and things like that. And I mark them up, cut them, and then sand them so they're perfect. Then with the roadway, same thing, except I've, with a sanding block, sanded a camber onto the roadway, and that way when the roadway butts up neatly against the footpath, you have a gutter then. And then with the router table, I've got a router table at home, I've routed a slot all the way along where the tram track goes into it, and it's just higher than the sleeper, so I can push the sleeper up in underneath and put the roadway right up to the edge of the tram track, to the rail. I've used Pico Code 80 track because it protrudes higher than the roadway, so in real life it would have been flush, it would have been level, but I need to clean the track for power, so that was my way around it. And then the middle section would have been it's just a very flat T piece of timber which I've routed both sides, push that up against the tram track, and then I can just keep moving along, put the next tram track in, and then the roadway, then the footpath on the other side. With the centre part with the tram tracks, I actually made up a little template. It only took about 2 minutes. Made it up out of styrene, and it was just a triangle with walls on it, and it was like a funnel, and the centre piece was just polyester resin, fiberglass resin, and I mixed that up in the cup and just poured it into the triangle and slowly moved along, and just poured it in over the sleepers in the centre piece, just trying hard not to get it onto the rails. Occasionally I didn't have to clean it up afterwards, and plus I'm always really lazy with these sort of things. I'll just fly into it like a bull at a gate, and I forgot to clear some of the rubbish out of the way and tripped over the dog and all that sort of stuff, and so occasionally there was a big puddle occurred with the resin, but cleaned up all right in the end.
Sorry, what did they make footpaths out of?
Back then, well, they varied. Looking at the area around the station area, I think it looks like it's actually concrete. They've actually had cement. Don't quote me on it. But other areas are decomposed granite. The station area looks like it was decomposed granite. It doesn't look like bitumen or anything like that in that era. Other footpaths, which I'll show in photos, they've been paved. Some seem to have cement or maybe clay square pavers. So
Sometimes they use coke ash.
coke ash, yeah. So this is the layout and just showing the roadways. The main roadway with Scott Street and Watt Street and Bond Street, they were all just made up of 6 pieces of MDF. So there was a fair bit of careful cutting and sanding, so that everything fitted perfectly. Like this one section here goes from here all the way to the end, up Watt Street and Bond Street is one piece of MDF, and it all fits perfectly flush into all the footpaths. Now these are some of the products I use. There's my little triangle thing that I knocked up in a couple of minutes. Polyester resin. Now with the landscape and a lot of the rougher dirt roads like Scott Street and Watt Street, it looks like they've used probably a horse-drawn grader and a roller, and the roads were actually incredibly smooth. But some of the rougher dirt roads and that, I have used Mod Podge, which is like woodwork glue, PVA glue, and I've slapped that down, which includes the landscape. There's no plaster or anything like that on the layout. And then I would do a sieve a load of this stuff here, which is dental pumice. So it's a pumice stone that's been graded, and that's fine grit. So it's like the volcanic pumice stone. So when you're using it, make sure you're wearing a good mask, otherwise you're up for a lung transplant. So if you can get hold of this talk, the PowerPoint presentation, all the details there really sharp with the address and phone numbers and whatever else. But I was put onto it by Steve Curry, the dentist, but it was really good. And this originally a friend of mine, Greg Coggins, has used this on his layout instead of using plaster, and it sets like cement. It's fantastic, and no cracking in it. So once I put the glue down, sieve the dental pumice, let it dry. I'd come back the next. It's a bit of a long drawn out process. But the next day I'd come back and I'd vacuum it up. I bought this cheap vacuum cleaner. Once again, wear a good mask. I didn't use my wife's best vacuum cleaner, and sucked all this pumice stone back into the vacuum cleaner, and then I could reuse it again. And then I'd put another coat down, and then sieve more dental pumice down, and I did about 4 layers, and so it's just virtually laminated rock, and tough as nails. With the roadway, the neat roadway of Scott Street and Watt Street, I actually spray painted with these colours. Once again, I've been using HUMBROL's enamels. I used HUMBROL number 63 and 21 for the roadway colour, just mix that up. And I sprayed the road so it was wet. And then I sprinkled the dental pumice onto the roadway, and then gave it another spray over the top of that, and it gave the gritty roadway effect. I actually got in the car, before I used this dental pumice, I actually got in the car and drove all the way to the coast and got a cup of sand and came back, and then I found the sand was too coarse. So beach sand, even though it looks fine when you're walking on it and all that sort of stuff, it's just still way too coarse for end scale and roadways. Especially if you're going to take a close-up photograph, it looks ridiculous. So this product was a really good product as far as that goes, very, very accurate. So also just the other colour was number 26. I use that sort of to muddy it up and dirty up the roadway. The footpaths I just use straight number 121. Now this is a shot, another Ralph Snowball photograph that's looking over Scott Street. It's a great photo because it shows all the fencing. The fence along Scott Street is a corrugated iron fence. That was one of the popular methods of fencing along the roadway, with dividing the trams and the trains. Then the station, many stations had picket fencing, so I've drawn that as an etch and recreated that. The signs that you can see in the background, I've drawn those up as decals. When you zoom in, you can see Hudson Soap as well as the Schweppes sign. And the Hudson Soap, they're all identical. So I started researching to see if I could find those. One thing with the Schweppes sign, it says Schweppes soda water as supplied to Her Late Majesty Queen Victoria for 63 years. And of course, Queen Victoria died in 1902 and my layout's 1899, and so she's not late at this stage. So what I ended up having to do was draw that decal without the late in it, and then I had to research to make sure that Schweppes still existed 60 years prior to that, which it did. And then I had to research to see how old Queen Victoria was back that long ago, and she would have still been alive. So I'm pretty confident she may have had a sip of Schweppes soda water back then. Also, you can see the Hudson Soap sign. I found an enamelled sign on the internet, which It didn't have the frilly bits on the top, but the writing was exactly the same as the signs in the black and white Ralph Snowball photograph. So I was able to put that into Corel and then trace it and then recreate that as a decal. So that was the overall view of those buildings. These are some of the other decals that I've drawn. That's just going along Hunter Street, just to give you an idea of some of the signage, anything that they could get their hands onto to put signs on, they would. Even I've seen photos on sort of country roads, and they've painted advertising on just fence posts and fence railings and things like that. Remington, there's a Remington typewriter sign on one of the buildings here at the station, so I've drawn that up as a decal. I couldn't find the exact sign of what it is on the picture there, but there was enough to signs on the internet to find the amount of triangles and the fonts of the writing, and so I could recreate that. The typewriter's facing this way in that sign, so I've redrawn that. Now with Ralph Snowball's photographs, there's some fantastic photographs which show in just each photograph so many things you can get out of from what the footpaths were paved with. Some of those are actual pavings, I think, and as well as street signs, architecture, horse-drawn vehicles, super sharp. This was 2 photographs that he took, and they merged together so well. So there is a join line where I've merged them just here. But it's great because it's the amount of detail and information and stuff that stores and shops would sell as today, which, you know, they're so different. Also, when you look at this, at the bottom of each pillar there's a hole, and I know that with a lot of railway veranda posts and things like that, they actually use the posts as the downpipes for the verandas. So I imagine this is the same story with that building there. This building, this is actually just near the train station. It's just opposite Newcastle train station. It appears in quite a few photographs. But I like it for the advertising sign, but also for the outfits that the people are wearing. These guys are sort of a bit more well-to-do, as to this group here. They're more working class clothing, and also with clothing, I also found it was quite hard to find clothing of that era, especially colours. So the best thing for that is artist paintings or movies and things like that, which certainly help. We're back with more advertising signs. This is someone's taken the photo of Newcastle station, but in a black and white you don't get actually see all the advertising signs, but the more you look, they're just absolutely everywhere. And if it was a coloured picture, they'd really pop, they'd really stand out. This is fencing. The other type of fencing was paling fences, was absolutely everywhere as well. It was interesting because there's no fences like it around where I live, but they've got metal strapping going along the fence, and they would have had galvanised clouts, I suppose, to nail them through onto the post. The building that's burning down there at the time, that's one of the many David Cohen warehouses that all had this spate of burning down over a short period of time, which sounds a lot like an insurance thing going on there. I've painted one of the David Cohen buildings on the backdrop of my layout, but the building actually burnt down as well, and I had to research to see when it burnt down, because when it burnt down they rebuilt it as a lower building, fairly unattractive, as to the earlier version, which had a fantastic sign along the top saying David Cohen. I wanted to put that on the backdrop. So a bit of researching, we found that it actually burnt down in New Year's Eve, 1899. So we just scraped it in. Yeah. More advertising signs. This is you know, some, you can see there's several signs there. This one's all painted on galvanised corrugated iron. Looks absolutely fabulous. They're not stickers. You know, the sign writing was superb back in those days. And you can see just behind it there's a pretty well a brand new Redfern passenger carriage sitting there. So the other fencing is, picket fencing. So a lot of stations, whether it's Newcastle or in Sydney, picket fencing was very attractive for garden areas and things like that. So I've drawn mine up to match the scale of the area of the garden area and reproduce that as an etch. Now another type of fencing, which you don't actually get to see because it's on the other side of Customs House on my model, but I had to make it because it was there. There's a very attractive wrought iron fence with stone pillars. So I've had a go at making that, and I etched the ironwork after going up there and measuring it. The pillars were just made of styrene, five pieces of styrene, and I've made them so that there's an individual piece on each side to create a slot in the middle, and that slot would then slip over the top and glue onto the iron, so it became well and truly fixed to it, and it won't fall apart. I've also soldered a flat piece of brass onto the ironwork as well, so I can, when I put the footpath in, and then the land section, which was another piece of MDF, I slid it up and left about 1/2 mil gap, and that would slot into the gap and solid as a rock. So that's the way. I don't like things just sort of hanging there. You know, it's good to have them actually fitted quite solid. So that's them starting to go together, and that's the end product where you can see the fence going along here. Once again, in that Ralph Snowball photograph, that was the dead drop. There it is there. I've done that one. Now this is a photograph looking back from Customs House Clock Tower, looking back the other way to Fort Scratchley. That's the David Cohen building, which is the shorter version after the fire. So I think this was taken around about 1908, this photograph. And the advertising sign for the Brett's sail making loft. I tried researching that. I couldn't find any colours, so I've just made it blue. Only you and me know that. And there it is there. All right, so other details. I've got some templates. Yeah, just talk amongst yourselves for a sec. I will be back. Here's one I prepared earlier. This is with my telegraph poles. You can pass that around. It's be careful. It's very attractive and very fragile. I etched up a load of cross arms with the insulators on it for the telegraph lines. Then I made up the telegraph poles out of 2 pieces of brass tube. So a smaller piece can go into a hole on the layout, and then just roughed up the brass tube with just the cutting disc on the Dremel. When it came time to actually soldering these things, I didn't, because I'm slack and I like to do everything without a template, and then find that the only way I can do it is with a template, which only takes about like a couple of minutes to make anyway. And then, so I originally tried soldering on one cross arm, and it worked all right. And then when I went to solder on the next one, then the first one would move. So I just slotted the brass tube in there. One thing with the telegraph poles, when you look at the photographs, they were actually staggered so that one cross arm was one side, then the next one up was on the other side, and so it kept swapping like that. So I was just glued on some balsa wood, and it could slot in between, and it gave me the spacing and aligning it up. So it was still a bit dodgy, but it certainly made things a lot more easier. And you can see them there. There's one there, there's another one there, and then some other ones further down. There's a couple hidden there. Now the pole on the corner of Watt Street and Scott Street, it was a square cut post and had a wooden junction box that sat up on the top of it, so I had to recreate that. So that's it there, the original one in another Ralph Snowball photograph. Now, yeah, as I mentioned before, with my era, it is hard to find colours of people's clothing and things like that. So the best way is actually to get it through artist paintings of that era. I just sort of downloaded many pictures from the internet once again, which is quite a saviour. This was an etching or a black and white picture, and obviously a couple of people had to go at colouring it. So it's got some really nice soft colours in it, but it all is a good reference for getting your colours correct. And of course, then you've got today. You've got the chance of getting some photos that are digitally coloured. So this is in Redfern in Sydney, but yeah, it looks awesome when they've been digitally coloured. Now this is how I've gone about making my people, because Bob Rawlins cast up a load of these early day people in pewter, but they've got such tiny little feet, and there's very little to hold them on the layout. You know, if I put them in the trailer and drove to Sydney for an exhibition, you'd probably find half of the people will be lying in the back of the trailer somewhere that would have broken off. So the way I've got around that, the ladies were easy, because in this era they all had long skirts, so I just got a drill and drilled it up their skirts, and then inserted a big brass rod, and then now the brass rods, I've just got a bit of scrap brass, and I've just soldered them onto the brass rod, and then stuck the ladies on, and painted them up. But with the fellas, every man and child, I've had to cut one leg off, and then with the drill I've drilled into every one of their stumps, and then recreated a new leg for them. And so I've you can see here, with the soldering iron, I've just bulked up the top part of the leg with solder. And then with the foot, I've just got a blob of solder on the soldering iron, put it on the brass and pulled away, and it's created a foot shape, and then I've folded it into shape. And so that's the end result, with a load of people with new legs and a stand where they can actually be fixed to the layout. So I'll just once they're painted up, I'll just drill a hole into the layout, and then they're quite solid there now.
How many people in the layout?
How many people? I don't know. Yeah, there's quite a few. There's quite a few people with new legs. So that's Scott Street is pretty well finished now. So that's sort of an end result, ending photo of Scott Street, which I think just about everyone's seen now at the convention. All right, so on to the water section. This is just sort of to finish up with my talk. The way I've gone about making the water for Newcastle, it was actually put onto me from Gary Spencer Salt. It was an idea of his, and I got a big tin of acrylic paint from Dulux. I went into Dulux with some photographs of Newcastle Harbour, and I said, look, I need this colour. So they mixed up the colour for me, and then it's not a gloss paint. It's a semi-gloss. And Greg White, who's not here today, but he is one of my modelling friends. He and his father had the tugboat fleet down in Eden, and as soon as he looked at some of my previous models with water, he said it looks too shiny, because I've used gloss varnish, and really high gloss varnish. He said it looks too shiny. Water's not that shiny. And I accept that from Greg, seeing he's lived a fair bit of his life on the ocean. And so I've used semi-gloss. The way I've done it is I've put a coat of the blue paint down, and then once that had dried, then I've put a really thick layer of paint down with a brush, which might be about 40 mil wide, and I've pushed little ripple waves into the water, and at the same time I've used a hairdryer. And the hairdryer at the same time has set the water ripples before it could all flatten out. So that worked out quite well. And then I've also, at Dulux Paint, also got a little cup of black tint in, just so I can vary the paint and darken it up and things like that. So there's just a few shots there looking at the tugboat. With the bow wave, I actually made that, I just soaked that some cotton wool in the paint, and then I wrapped the hull of the tugboat in Glad wrap, and then just pushed the cotton wool up against the hull. And once that dried, then I could take the boat out. And there's just, a few other little waves that the water sort of builds up there and then sinks down. So it created that effect of the boat with movement. And then once it had dried, then I just got a paintbrush with white paint and just I don't know if the word is stippled or whatever it is, to create a air bubble effect. That's just another shot of the poly woodside just sitting there in the water, but it shows the colouring that I've used. Photos actually seem to make it look better than the colour itself that I've chosen. But now there's another effect which is on the internet. It's if you just type in making water with toilet paper. It's an 11-minute little talk from, I can't remember the guy's name. Hey? Yeah, and he's quite a character, but it doesn't take 11 minutes. It took me probably a day or two to make the water, but with that effect. So myself and the dog Cruz, we went out to the carport, we sat down and started making this water. So just on a board, I marked out the paddle tugboat on the board, and then just started. I slapped a load of half aquadeer and half water and onto the board, and then started placing the toilet paper on. It's good to use toilet paper that's actually really cheap, low-grade stuff that falls apart, the stuff that you curse. And when you put another coat of glue on top, it starts to sort of fall apart and turn into more like a pulp than or paper mache. Then I'll do another coat. That was another coat, and then I just ruffled up a bit of just a little bit of toilet paper to create the bow wave, wrap the boat in Glad wrap again, and then press that up against it. And I also did the sort of the splashing effect of the paddle wheels in the water as well. So that's just another shot looking at it. It's just another method, but it's a simple method, and you're not dealing with resins or anything like this. So it's all generally stuff that you can get quite easily. And that's it with a bit of paint on. And here it is here, Exhibit A. You can just pass that around. It's pretty heavy because it's the biggest lump of MDF I could find in the shed. And so that's how it looks with the paddle tug with the paint, putting the water on it. No, because that was just, I did that the other day. I just thought I better have something to show. And there's just another shot of it. So it's not a bad effect, and you could probably do better again if you took a bit more time. That's a picture of Eden for the colour of the water. That's what happens when you throw a chip on the bonnet of your car. This is a picture of a boat, obviously in America. When you see, it's a good example of the bow wave and things like that, but it's only a short boat. It can vary depending on the length of the boat. The water is probably quite a dark colour, and if you did that, the reason why it's blue is purely because of the light coming from the sky above. If you had a backdrop, if you had dark water like that and you had a really high blue backdrop, you'd get these fantastic reflections of the sky and hills and whatever else. Yeah. So these are just pictures off the internet, just showing the water effect as a boat moves through it. I said yesterday, this is a bit like Cole Boland's pleasure craft that he owned or used to own. Looks like there's a whale there, just near him. Now these won't relate to a layout, but I just thought I'd put these on because the modelling is absolutely superb. You can actually make water so real as a model. This would probably have been done with resins, but to get these effects, the layering and stuff like that is absolutely superb. The way it's breaking through the waves, and the effect that water has as the ship goes through. So amazing photo. That one's fantastic as well. Once again, I'd say it was done with resins, the main effect of the water, the smooth water. That's another model. It's hard to believe these are models, but you can see that the edge of the diorama going along there. So there is some incredible modelers out there. I reckon this one you could actually use the toilet paper effect with this. It's very similar effect. Another one. Hope you don't mind these, but once again, you'll never have an ocean view like this on your layout, but it's mainly just to show that water can be done well. This is a bit of a blurry photograph, but like the bloke who's made this, the person who's made this is just absolutely superb, the wash going over the ship. Now this photograph, it's almost a matte colour and a matte finish, and you'll get that effect from if it's misty. That's the sort of effect you'll get on water. So when you're making this sort of stuff, you really have to research it, and then you can actually get it right. And that's the last photograph. It's just a little diorama that someone's done. I'd say it's been done with resins again, but just even getting the wash and the bubbles of how it really is. And that's it. So that was pretty quick, I think, considering we had a blackout for a moment. Any questions? Good, okay.